I don't know how it is with you, but I feel a little isolated. No traveling at all. And there are so many conferences and events that were canceled over the summer. As someone who's doing research in the service field, I start to miss my global community of like-minded service practitioners and academics. I miss the inspiration. I miss the exchange of ideas. I miss these special aha moments that you usually have on these events. Honestly, there should be really a format for that somewhere online in the internet. Welcome to All About Service, the show that connects academics with practitioners, established scholars with newcomers, curious seekers with new ideas. My name is Werner Kunz and I'm professor for marketing at the University of Massachusetts, and I will be your host for this show. I hope you like this format, and if you do so, please like it, leave us a comment, subscribe to our channel, hit the bell button, and please share it with your circles. Our topic today is the topic of everybody worldwide right now. And that's the first global epidemic, Covid-19. And we all ask ourselves, when will it end? And we maybe ask ourselves, what do we learn out of it? How will be the world afterwards? And I'm happy that I don't need to speculate myself about it. I could invite two excellent scholars who do research in related areas. So thank you very much, Ray, and thank you very much, Josina, to be here in this show today. Ray Fisk is the professor of marketing at Texas State University, is also the founder of SERVSIG and SERVCollab. We'll pretty likely hear about that later more. And he is always on the hunt to use service research to make the world a better place. So, Ray, thank you for being here at the show.
Werner, I'm happy to join in this first effort.
Wonderful. Josina Vink is associate professor at Oslo School of Architecture and Design. She made her Ph.D. at Karlstad University about service design, and she is a passionate observer of the healthcare industries. And I'm happy to have you here because we can learn so much from this highly affected area. Thank you, Josina, for being here in the show.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Before we start, I really wonder, how are you holding up in these times here? So how is life?
Well, I checked my calendar yesterday, and this is finishing up 8 weeks of social isolation here in Texas. Our university announced it was shutting down on March 11th, and that was just before our spring break. And so they gave it an extra week of spring break, and everybody went to teaching online. And it's been remarkably bizarre to not be able to do all those things that we take for granted in modern life. Certainly, that's part of what makes this such a profoundly disturbing thing for so many people, not just emotionally, but physically, that they can't do what they used to do for their own safety. They can't do those things. So it's been a serious challenge, but my wife and I are certainly doing just fine, stuck at home.
So, Josina, how is it with you?
The present time, what's on my mind is really, because I'm, born and raised in Canada, currently in Norway, and have friends in different places, it's really this feeling of kind of straddling the multiplicity with something that's global and common, and how different places are dealing with it, and feeling, talking to my family in Canada or friends in the US and understanding what's happening in different hot pockets, or my PhD student who's from China, and the kind of understanding from those different contexts, and living in a space now. Norway's moving to opening up right now, and kids are back in school, and things are starting to kind of shift, but at the same time, other places, there's a lot of cases. And I'm feeling personally kind of living that tension of what does it mean for different places to be in different spots? And when there's the kind of a common thoughts and common agenda, but yet differing responses, and what that's like, especially for people who are maybe transcending some of those boundaries a little bit, or not living in places where their relatives or friends are living.
We all didn't want to have that here. This is for sure. But just looking what we all experience globally right now, in this lockdown, is there anything on COVID that you realize, oh, that's interesting. That's even positive, something new that I have learned. So anything that you observed that maybe comes good out of this year?
I think the one thing that is positive, even though a bizarre positive, is that the rest of the species is realizing the importance of the service systems of the world. The healthcare system especially, but the education system. I don't have kids, but if I did, I would be now the parent homeschooling children. And certainly parents are used to sending their children off to school. So the importance of the education service systems, the importance of restaurant services, airline services, we took them for granted until now we can't use them because of the risk of contagion that all those human interactions create. I mean, service systems are fundamentally based on human interactions. And when human interaction is dangerous to us physically, then it completely changes our thinking. But it makes us realize how important service systems are, I think.
Just to pick up on that, I think, Ray, for me, you hit the nail on the head about what's interesting during this time when you talked about appreciating things that were normally taken for granted. For me, that's something that's really interesting because I'm seeing that kind of appreciation is also enabling for change, experimentation, new things to happen, because the things that we take for granted normally we're just carrying out the regular ways of working, but there's all of a sudden this kind of huge room for conflict, for contesting certain things, for exploring new ways of doing because we've never done some things before, or some things that were battles early on. So in Canada, the Association of Physicians has been battling for a billing code for remote consultations for patients for a long time. And then it happens like this. And all of a sudden there's kind of explosions of some of these things. And even, in my personal life, certain aspects that you realize a taken for grantedness of certain ways of operating. And for me, that's exciting to really open up the space for innovation and service system change, because we actually have an appreciation for a greater layer of some of those service systems than we normally do, I think.
That's interesting. Yeah, great.
Yeah, I agree completely with that. I mean, the amount of change that's happening is good and bad. But out of this turmoil, I hope that we see some far better human service systems in the aftermath.
I think for me, that's like a very interesting and contested idea. And like if you think about some of Naomi Klein's ideas about kind of like from the shock doctrine and things like this that are saying, actually, this is a time where different people's ideas can actually come to shape those service systems and for detrimental and for positive. So it's really a time that is contested and that is to be defined. So I think there's a ton of uncertainty, as you're saying there, Ray, and there's potential and opportunity in that, but there's also some fear and frightening approaches that are also bubbling up in this time. So I agree.
Josina, I find it quite interesting. You said already in the introduction that you have a background. So you're from Canada, but you have your family in the Netherlands, or there's still some heritage from Netherlands. You worked in the US and you made a Ph.D. in Sweden, and you're now in Norway. So you must know a lot of people around the world, and you have friends there. So I wonder a little bit, you're pretty likely in contact with them. Do you see how they are dealing with that? I don't mean necessarily the political society part. We talk about that pretty likely later. But do you see any commonalities and especially differences between how Canadians and maybe the Scandinavian, for the Swedish or the Norwegian people are dealing with this complete situation?
I mean, of course, there's some of these objective things that everyone's looking at around numbers or around what policies are being made in terms of shutdown. But for me, one of the interesting things that we've been discussing is this difference in nuance between trust of government, for example. So in Canada, I would say we hold a bit more of a critical eye to our government and the policies that are being put in place. Whereas I'd say in general, when I'm talking to friends in Sweden, when I'm, here in the Norwegian context, and even in my workplace setting, there's much more kind of affirmation of we trust what the government is doing. We trust that it's informed by evidence and kind of rolling with those government policies no matter what. And as a kind of Canadian, I still feel a little skeptical. So as Norway's kind of now opening back up, I'm like, is this the right thing to do? Should I be now going out with friends? It's still a little more that hesitation than, okay, if the government says I will do. So for me, that's definitely one of the distinction is in the sense of trust. Another is in how the level of extent to which formal policy is needed to kind of carry out some of these actions. So in Sweden, many of my friends and colleagues there, I think there's many of the similar things are happening in some spaces in Sweden as in that happened in Norway or happened in Canada around people staying home when they can. But a lot of it happened because there is a kind of informal acknowledgement and a collective actions to do that versus some of the kind of formal measures that we're seeing in other countries. And there's also distinctions between how close people are and how much contact people are in and density and things like that between these places. So that all comes into play. But I think, there's some nuance in some of the arrangements, the informal arrangements and with government and with each other that exists that is kind of distinct to me in different places.
I know that you're doing research in healthcare, and I just wonder, you have deep insights about, you did your studies in Norway, right?
Recently in Norway, but originally 4 years in Sweden, and now for the last kind of 6-8 months.
You know both, Sweden, Norway. I don't know how much you know of the Canadian way, but do you think, how are they prepared? How are they doing right now? What you know from your frontline experience? When it comes to this crisis, you're doing research right now in that area, right?
I mean, in the Norwegian context right now, there has been very few cases in the last little while. Norway has been able to respond very effectively. The healthcare system has done extremely well. I mean, Norway is one of the highest funded healthcare systems per capita. So it has huge privilege in how it's been able to kind of cope with things. But at the same time, there's been pretty dramatic measures. Some of the hospitals here have went down to only half the staff on the floor at one time to not create too much congestion and spread where they weren't in frontline response. And then a lot of people being reallocated to kind of COVID measures. But the wonderful and interesting thing to me is some of the partners that we're working with, the ability that they have made to kind of make quick adjustments. So partners that are working on remote care. So monitoring patients who are at home, what are their vitals, what's their blood sugar like, their blood pressure, living with chronic disease, which are at huge risk. And they've been able to adapt some of their kind of remote care measures from patients that have a small group of patients that have normally been using that to other patients because of the times that it makes sense to not have somebody in a hospital that then can have family visit or that has, greater needs. So there's been some pretty rapid adjustments and innovations and experiments that have taken place here, which has been super cool to see. But then I also want to highlight, yes, inside the healthcare system, there's been some really brilliant things happening. But then an example from the Canadian context in Toronto, a few of my colleagues there have really been super active in kind of community response, in facilitating, getting hundreds of volunteers to match up with seniors who are in Toronto community housing, the social housing there, to get vulnerable seniors the kind of supplies they need so they don't have to leave their house. So I also just want to acknowledge the amazing community organizing that has been taking place in lots of spaces. So incredible on many fronts, I think, the adaptations to this.
You mentioned you observed this kind of experimentation in the healthcare area, how they're dealing with this kind of crisis. Can you a little bit detail that a little bit more? And maybe we can learn something for other industries out of this.
I mean, I've been just in the last kind of 10 weeks working with a service design class, actually, and one healthcare partner in Larvik municipality, which is a couple hours just outside of Oslo. And we've been running these kind of little tiny tests or kind of design explorations during kind of COVID time. So, one group of students was just exploring what would it be like to more proactively call patients and help them think creatively about how they're exercising, what they're eating in this time, based on some of the limitations, and engage staff in some of those broader conversations than some of the more narrow ones around physical health and conditions and things like that. So, it was like a 30-minute exploration into like, what would happen if you did this? And that sort of thing enabled them to think about how they could do that more, be more strategic, take on more proactive steps. In another case, there has been like exploring with cancer patients that are in palliative care that are, and what would it be like to have this kind of remote care in the home and supporting them with caregivers, then connecting with some of these specialists, and how would that look? And that sort of thing has catalyzed some change. So it's been incredibly cool to see how the openness of healthcare professionals who are currently kind of also stressed and having to do quite a lot of things, but realize that the only way forward is to kind of experiment to learn and do that early to then inform kind of some of these strategic approaches and do it in very small ways to just learn quite quickly and kind of adjust their approaches.
So what of this would you observe is fitting to whatever you have researched before? I know you're a specialist of service design. You have made a Ph.D. around it, and you had concepts that you developed, and now COVID-19 comes and we're in a complete different situation. So anything there that maybe challenges your concept, you don't need to be super critical of your Ph.D., but you know what I mean? Or where you can say, oh, now we need to change service design. It needs to be a little bit adapted with that.
All of the above, I think. I mean, some of it has come to fruition. So I was looking very much about how service design is a process of shaping some of the social structures, the norms and rules and roles and ways of operating, particularly looking at healthcare. And so I would say those things are extremely relevant in this context. And I'm looking at design very much as an intentional process. So one of the feelings is that I was looking at this kind of how do we cultivate intentionality in people to make some of these design choices. But then, COVID happens and people are responding to things immediately and not necessarily with this kind of more strategic intentionality all the time, but new things pop up. So it did reframe in my mind for me. Of course, I was aware that kind of shocks and crises and things like that can shape service systems as well. But sometimes recognizing the lack of intentionality that's also shaping our service systems, and that we can't fully control all of these kinds of pieces of service systems. And a friend of mine, Vanessa Rodriguez, is working just now to finish up her PhD and defend in June. It's on like service systems resilience. And I think for me, that's kind of something that's becoming increasingly prominent, that we need to have the space to adapt to change. We can't have such rigid norms and rules. In some cases, those are very helpful in guiding, but we also need the space to be able to adapt. But I would say still, despite kind of these shifts, there's still in this time quite clear need for collective intentionality and trying to work within these kind of conflicting perspectives during this time to figure out, the next direction where we're going to head through this process and take in what we've learned.
Josina, there's another thing that I would be quite interested in. You talk about social structures. And if I understood your PhD right, so you really work very often with these social structures, and that they're so important for a service design to be adjusted. Now, I wonder, it looks like a little bit like an atomic element of a service design framework, at least of your service design framework. So I wonder, did anything change in this atomic, I will describe it like this, in this kind of underlying basis, especially with such a huge impact like the COVID-19 experience that we all have now globally?
So yeah, you're asking, do I think those have shifted in some way due to kind of the COVID situation or how we deal with them. I think they're more relevant than ever. They're maybe more malleable than ever. I think at this present time, there's a bit more up for grabs, as I was kind of saying earlier. But maybe super important in how we see it playing out in different countries and in different locations. Some of those underlying kind of social norms are maybe helping guide how we're actually kind of carrying these things out. But in terms of service design, for me, it's absolutely illuminated a need for further exploration, not just around how human actors are shaping these things, but also kind of the non-human, the environmental, like how this even started in the first place, the kind of entanglement between the human and the non-human aspects in service systems and how that has an impact and influence on these things. So that's something that wasn't in my purview as much. I mean, I think it's something I was interested in, but I haven't fully kind of fleshed out. But I think that becomes increasingly relevant with COVID, with other crises like the climate change, migration related issues coming from climate change and other things. So for me, that's absolutely top of mind.
I think it shows already how important that is, these kind of social structures, how strongly they influence us, and that the view that we maybe had in the last 10 years on individual episodes is not explaining everything right now. And I know from Ray that he's also in this service system approach, and in his kind of area talks very often about the social cohesions of different communities and how important that is. You are anyhow already on the hunt to, like I said at the beginning, to create better societies, use service research for that purpose. So I wonder with Ray, with COVID-19 and with the collective experience that we have here now, are we on a way to a better world after that? What is your guess? What do you think?
Well, my best answer is none of us knows where we're going with this. And that's exciting and scary as hell. It's exciting in the sense that when things are as uncertain as we see right now, there is opportunity in that uncertainty. But that uncertainty can be exploited by lots of actors, lots of people who want to undermine or do harm. So there is great risk in our stage now. And one of my biggest concerns right now is that if you look back at prior chaotic events in human history, the tendency to persecute minorities, persecute others of some kind, is a common side effect of these times. The example of the United States that is a horrible example was during World War II, Japanese Americans were put into internment camps because they were seen as somehow dangerous, even though they were born in the United States, but they were born from Japanese parents. Still, they were put into these camps. That's persecution, clearly. It's a violation of basic human rights. I'm convinced that if we do it right, we can rethink and elevate human rights beyond 1948, when Eleanor Roosevelt led the first major human rights declarations, the Universal Human Rights. If we can come together after a virus that disrupts the world's economy, there is hope for us. But if we start persecuting each other, mistreating each other in new and awful ways, it will be a worse fate than ever. It would start to resemble the Brave New Worlds, the 1984's dystopian fiction of my childhood.
What can we do as service researchers, or maybe as people who work in the service industry, to get the weight more towards the good side and using it in a positive way?
I am. And in my career, I'm now in my 40th year in service research. I was stubborn enough to insist on doing service research when my advisors told me not to. And in the time that I've been involved in service research, I've seen a shift, slow but steady shift, from a stage where service research was mostly seen as a monetary exchange research area, to a shift to broaden it in many, many very powerful and important ways. So I'm convinced that our service research community is ready to elevate our approach and our skills in service to humanity. I really think that we need to revisit what our purpose of service research is. Are we servants to corporations? Are we monetary exchange experts only? Or are we serving the human? Are we trying to help social structures like Josina was discussing? Are we trying to improve social structures so that we aren't leaving people out? Most of human society is designed to exclude. I think if the service research community comes together and focuses on service research as a public health research area so that we can help build the strength and the resilience of the service community, the human service community, that will be for the best. And that's what I hope. I hope we can not only do it amongst ourselves, but reach out to all those other disciplines that touch and interact with human needs and work together to accomplish that.
Ray, what can we do as service researcher practically? So is there any different initiative? Should we focus on different research strategies, or should we, any attempts that we can do to get the balance in that direction?
Well, none of it's easy because I'm talking about moving the field in a different direction. And that fights the traditional academic structures in which the tendency is that what's important is to do research that is shared with academics only. We need to reach out to the public more. That's one key part of what we need to do. We need to be more public scholars and communicate more with the rest of humanity about what we're doing. We need to work with, like I was saying, more of the other researchers, but we need to be able to share that. We need to be talking to the political leaders of the world. I've lived in a world in which I've never yet seen a leader of an American country, the American presidents, in other words. I've never once seen an American president talk about the service economy as important. They talk about manufacturing as important. They talk about agriculture as important. And sure, they are important, but they misdiagnose the importance of the service economy. Maybe that'll change now. But if political leaders see no purpose or no major value of the service economy, they won't support the efforts. So I think we've been talking to ourselves more than enough. We need to talk to others and build collaborations that span much greater ranges than we've ever done before. Span disciplines, span nations, and build capacity. This is where the design ideas that Josina's been involved in and I've been involved in, to me, give me great optimism. Because in my early days, I did customer satisfaction research. And yes, I was able to document that customer satisfaction was bad. But could I show how to really change it? I was looking at the interaction level, and most of the problems were above the interaction level. And that's true for human society. Most of our problems are more complex. We need solutions that can address that complexity and design for inclusion, design for fairness. Instead of what we have now, we have systems worldwide that are designed to leave some people poorly educated, some people poor, some people with inadequate access to healthcare, and I could make a longer list. All of those are human mistakes. And to me, this virus, this COVID-19 virus crisis, might give us enough motivation as a service research field to help be able to solve some of those problems. I would never see us as the only people solving it, because that's an impossibility. But one of the fundamental things that I hope comes out of this is the realization that we're all in this together, that we as a species are facing an invisible virus. If we fight amongst each other, we aren't going to solve the problem. If we work together to solve it, we can solve it.
It looks to me that you're also arguing very similar to Josina here. And I know that you're also you mentioned service systems. So I wonder a little bit, when you look on the impact of COVID-19, any guesses how service systems will change from what we are used to till the beginning of this year?
My biggest guess there is that I think we will end up revisiting these trust systems of human societies. And the first revisit is the issue that is so commonplace when people meet each other in a face-to-face interaction for the first time, and they reach out and shake hands. Well, that tradition might, at least for a few years, go away, because now that handshake that might seem ordinarily just a minor risk might seem to be a major risk. So I think there's some social distancing. Although I don't like that word social distancing, to me, it's mostly physical distancing. because socially we're able to interact electronically like we're doing now. And it's wonderful that we have that. But I really do think that there are going to be some efforts to rethink trust amongst humans. And Josina mentioned trust earlier in her comments. I think trust is at the heart of why service systems have spread as much as they have. When it was possible to trust that you could travel across the planet safely, that was a level of trust that led to tremendous economic and social progress. But now we're in a stage where that trust has collapsed because of the many, many uncertainties caused by this virus. And it's going to be a challenge, I think, to rebuild trust. But I think trust is at the heart of what makes services work.
You showed me a project in our prep for this kind of interview, and I found it quite intriguing what you can do with services, especially in times like this with video. Can you a little bit reflect on that and explain that a little bit?
The example I was discussing with you, Werner, has no direct link to ServCollab at all, but I've been looking for, as I've been helping build the logic for ServCollab, because the first stage for me as the founder was to build a logic that I could convince others of. And as I've looked for examples of organizations that are doing the kinds of things that I think Serve Humanity should do, I discovered an organization called Witness, and it's called witness.org on the internet, witness.org. What they do is encourage people to share videos of human rights violations, shining a camera light on human rights violations is a desperately needed step in human society. So much of the human past is when misdeeds were done in darkness. But the very fact that the typical human might have a camera today tremendously creates opportunities. And this is where witness.org is a great example. And I had mentioned to you, Werner, that they've got a COVID-19 page where they're encouraging people to share videos of human rights violations in some way linked to the COVID-19 crisis. And they are happening. They're happening in India, where they're discriminating against people in India and persecuting them. And they're happening in the United States, where migrants trying to cross the border are being mistreated because of an excuse, the COVID-19 crisis. So these videos, to me, are a very powerful and interesting idea. And there are many other nonprofits doing similar serving humanity work. And I've used them partly as an inspiration for what I think we as the service research community should do. I don't mean we should be something like Witness, or another great one would be Doctors Without Borders, but I think we should be studying how those systems work. So a service researcher might be involved with a team of service researchers studying an organization like witness.org or studying Doctors Without Borders and helping share the tools that those organizations have developed, sharing those ideas of collaboration in service to humankind.
I think it becomes already apparent when we talk about all of these kind of elements here. It's like there's so many research questions here. There are now even more than there were before. We are living in a new world, at least a world that has a collective new experience, and that will impact. And we know it will have impact on the economy. Service industry is part of the economy. So we need to live with a complete new framework. So I wonder a little bit, how will it be after we are done with the first kind of emergency situation of COVID, when we are over that? And that would be very interesting. For that, we have prepared a little game. Would you be ready for this kind of game?
Find out.
We'll find out. So I ask you guys, if you can bring a piece of paper or a stack of paper or a whiteboard and a big marker. Yes, wonderful. Josina and Ray is also ready. Do you have your paper? Great. That is wonderful. So the game is relatively simple, and that is, I will ask you a question or a statement, and you write down right when you hear that statement, what you think. If it is a question, well, write down one or two words that summarize whatever came in your head. So I have the feeling that 2020 is done. So this year will maybe get better, but it will be so affected by COVID and all of these first emergency situations. But how will be 2021? How will be 2022? What will be lasting here? So let's play that game. So the first one, the service job will be disappearing? Write it down. Which service jobs will disappear? Okay, anything that came in your mind?
Give me a sec.
Okay, good. Do you have something, Ray?
Yes.
Yeah, show me. So what is it?
Basically, I think it's human contact jobs. Many of those are going to be disappearing. And by that, I mean the people who are face-to-face service providers. My example from my own experience in college might be an easy one. I worked my way through college in my first 5 years of college, waiting tables. It was human to human. My students that do those same jobs today, all of them lost their jobs except one or two. They were able to do back office sorts of things in businesses that still had a back office function, maybe takeouts even. So the human to human in so many service areas will be replaced as much as it can by technology interactions. So we're seeing a growth in the technological interaction, and at least in the short term for the next year or 2 years, a decline in human contact jobs.
Josina, what do you have?
I'm going to stick with my advocating for a blank sheet because I'm going to go with a bigger vision, because I think service, as Ray was outlining, is something that is so fundamental to our interactions, as humans. So I would argue, some of these service jobs are absolutely going to transform, but we're going to have different things that take that on. So I agree with Ray in the sense, yes, technology is going to take that on. So I'm going to go with the jobs being a kind of more abstract term and say, we're not actually at all letting go of any, our service jobs are not changing. Service jobs are kind of key to our needs and our underlying kind of human rights and all of these things, but they might be transforming in who or what does this job. And I think they're becoming, more important than ever. So I would argue, not one line is going to be disappearing, but it may be transforming. That's my gut. I'm avoiding.
I give you another minute, and not a minute. I give you another 10 seconds. And now that you reflect on the jobs that were disappearing, write down which jobs were definitely high in demand.
Okay, I wrote digital service designers. I mean, I'm in the service design field, and it's not that I think everything is going to be happening online from here on forward, but that especially considering the way the world is evolving, thinking about the kind of borders that have become super clear all of a sudden, that there's going to be increasing need to find ways to transcend distance to create that sense of human connection. I'm already kind of, overnight was learning how to facilitate online co-design workshops and without any training and things like that. And we need to still be able to get to the kind of nuanced human connection where people don't feel like leaving the meeting that was just half the meeting that an in-person meeting was, and that we can facilitate new service experiments without being physically in the hospital at a time of crisis. So I am voting for service designers that are better able and equipped to kind of transcend distance through digital means, but not taking away the kind of human experience.
Ray, what do you have?
Well, my answer is very similar to Josina's. It's just broader than Josina's. Mine is tech services, technology services in general. And my reason for labeling it that broadly is that I think the jobs that have technology aspects are going to be filled faster than the ones that are only human contact. And I do think that human contact will become incredibly valuable. And those jobs might actually finally be paid much better. Because in so many service systems now, some of the lowest paid jobs are human contact jobs. So the salaries on many of those remaining jobs should come up, but there won't be as many of them, at least in the near term. But we now need, and we know we need, better systems that are technology enabled. And Josina did a great summary of some of those issues. We need better design of those. So I really think she's exactly right. The digital service designer jobs will be a category that should and needs to grow rapidly. But in general, technology, any service that has a technology aspect is going to grow, and virtually every service needs to be looking at how can they strengthen and improve technology as a supporting framework for the service they provide. Because that's what we're already doing with things like the internet that we're using today. It's a supporting framework for human interaction. So we've made a lot of progress, but we need a lot better. Video conferencing is a long way from what it needs to be. It was much worse in my day back in the 1980s when I was first experimenting with it, but we're still not there. We're still not there when a virtual classroom feels close to human contact. And we need to get it to feel closer. And that would be just one of many examples of the need to make the technology bridge the physical distance and improve the social aspects of the experience. Because it's that feeling of social aspects that we're all desperately missing.
Let's do a third one. So it's of course also economic implications. So we all somewhere close to business here. So what do you think? Which products will rise in the price and which products will fall in the price? Any ideas what becomes more expensive and what becomes cheaper? So just two answers. So who has it first?
Well,
show it to us. What do you have?
I'll be happy to show them if you're ready.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, so I've got sanitation. I think they're going to be, just, on the same wavelength, I guess. I really think that this crisis is going to create a much greater desire for sanitary systems. And in human history, things like hand washing is something that is still not as widespread as it should be. So sanitation is still a weakness in human society, but we need to elevate sanitation to much more sophistication. And I don't mean it so much that the typical sanitation product would be cheap or more expensive, but I think that there would be a lot more money spent in total on sanitation. And the other answer was the issue of formal wear clothing. I mean, I am certainly a person who, if I went to the classroom or left the house for some sort of business meeting, I might be dressed in a coat and tie. But I've got a bunch of dusty ties in my closet and a bunch of dusty coats, and I don't have a reason to need one for who knows how long.
So, Josina, what do you have?
Yeah, we're on similar wavelengths here. So we both have a public health kind of item that's increasing and a clothing item decreasing. So that's very interesting. So I have a kind of just the product of mental health supports more broadly. I think in addition to sanitation, and maybe they even go hand in hand, the idea of being hygienic and our mental health supports and what that kind of, or going digital and what that means for our kind of mental health. I think we have a radical shortage of thinking and supports around mental health, and that's going to drive prices for those things. And I mean, in the US context, that's a lot of private sector work, but even in public sector contexts like Norway, where we have, as I mentioned, the highest per capita funding for healthcare, there's still radical mental health support shortages. So I think those, to me, major rise. And then I wrote down pants as my declining price of the alternative, because it's like, yeah, as you can see from all of this, doesn't matter what pants we're wearing. And if we're doing these digital sessions more often, I have lots of lovely pants that are sitting in my closet. And I think those are becoming more and more irrelevant.
So let's do a last one. We all work in academia and we all teach. So the big question is, will the demand for higher education, will that rise or will that fall when we look after the crisis of COVID? So what is next year or the years that are coming?
I have rise. I'm coming from a Norwegian context. We have the highest unemployment since World War II here. There's a lot of folks who, are looking at being retrained or have the opportunity to kind of do that. We have public infrastructure here in Norway where education, you don't have to pay out of pocket for education, and there are some supports put into education. So in a contextual way here, absolutely, the government is feeding more money into more broader class sizes for universities, more PhD positions as a way to kind of do this work. And I only imagine that to grow over the long term as, economies are shifting and people are realizing kind of where they want to be. So I think absolutely rise. And it just, even for myself, I think there's so much more to learn and new things emerging and evolving. So yeah, that's my vote.
Okay. Ray, what do you think?
My answer is related to Josina's. In the short term, I think demand will be down. And I've written specifically the next 2 years, 2021, 2022. I think demand will be down because the economies of the world are going to be down for at least the next few years. In the long term, I expect the demand for higher education to rise for a very basic reason. And that is that education is our species' only solution to the many problems that we face in the world. We're all born the same. We're all born completely and totally ignorant. And the only thing that changes our human potential, the potential for each of us, is education. And we've made the progress we've made because of rising levels of education. So I fully expect that while there are going to be short-term disruptions and problems, higher education will come back because without it, we are doomed as a species.
Okay. So thank you very much for taking the time for this YouTube show. It was very insightful and I would love to talk about that hours more. So thank you and see you hopefully very soon. Maybe not this year, but in the years afterwards on some conferences.
Thank you, Werner. It's been fun.
Thank you. It was fun.
Thank you. So that was it. I hope you liked the first episode of this new series. If you do, please like it. To keep up the momentum, we really depend on people like you. There's already a vivid conversation about the consequences of COVID-19 for the service world. Check out our Facebook group and the comments here below. If you have an idea for a topic that we should cover, if you know a guest that you want to suggest, or if you want to join the show, so please make a comment in the show notes and I will come back to you. Till then, please stay tuned and I see you in the next video.